So welcome to the post-lunch session, session 3 of the Sri Lanka Economic Summit 2020. And this session deals with upgrading higher value add by leveraging local resources. We have our panel here, plus one joining us virtually, and I'd like to hand you over to the moderator for this session, Executive Vice President of John Keel's Group, Roshani Jayasundara Moraes.
Thank you, Savi. Very good afternoon to everybody joining in for this third session. We will endeavor to talk about upgrading higher value add by leveraging local resources. Let's start this session, the graveyard session as they call it, with a topic that keeps us awake at night. And let's hope that it will keep us awake this afternoon too. How are our local industry performing? How are they competing in the international markets? How are they taking advantage of the post-pandemic trade shifts that are taking place? Are we leveraging our resources, especially our talent? Whatever wealth we create, is it trickling down? Have we got people-centric policies? And have we got the right policies in place to support industry? Even though we have a limited domestic market, we sit next to a $3 trillion economy and a market of around 1.8 billion people, mostly young and upwardly mobile. How are we taking advantage of that? Are we using the advantage of our geolocation? On the ease of doing business index, we're 99th out of 190, behind India and Southeast Asia. On the competitiveness index, we are 84th out of 141, again behind India and Southeast Asia. His Excellency the President this morning mentioned that the government is working towards improving that, and that's all great. Despite these challenges, some of our companies have become world-class, and some of our industries have proven that we have the will as well as the talent required. Some examples are the ICT and the apparel industries. And at a company level, companies like Sparsilon, Dilma, and two of the companies that we will talk about in our session. We will also hear from an expert from Vietnam about how they transformed in less than 3 decades from an agro-based economy to what it is today. Okay, so let's get into it now, and let me introduce the speakers first. We have Mr. Nguyen Luong Hien joining us from Vietnam virtually. He's a partner at PwC Vietnam, and he heads the deals and strategy team of PwC Vietnam. We will next have Mr. Suranga Hera, who's the CEO of the English Tea Shop. And next would be Dr. Anu Shamarasinghe, Managing Director of BPPL Holdings. And on the panel, we will have Dr. Dushni Veerakorn, Executive Director of the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, and she also heads its microeconomic policy research. And next we have Mr. Upasena Disanayaka, Chairman of the IDB. With that, may I invite Hien to make his address. We would like him to talk about Vietnam's trajectory, the growth trajectory, the different stages it went through, and the policy framework that spurred and supported it. Hien, over to you.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Roshani. Hi, everyone. Very, very happy to have the chance to talk to you about a bit the trajectory of Vietnam. So I'll share my screen right now. Is it all good? Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
All right. All right. So let me make it. Okay. All right. So as Roshani was saying, I think the history of Vietnam is interesting in the sense that indeed it's a history of a very fast-paced opening to the rest of the world that would include both turning the economy from a very agricultural, domestic-centric country to an export-based and FDI-centric countries, and that in a quite quick time frame. As you may know, I think the history of modern Vietnam really started in 1975 after the war, and until 86 or the 90s, Vietnam is pretty much a completely closed country, right? So I think there's almost zero to none contact with all the external or the global economy at this date, right? So the whole history has been how to open and how to build a global an economy that would be very well included in the global economy from the 90s to now. As a milestone, for instance, Vietnam only joined the WTO in 2007. But I would say from this phase, from 2007 to now, pretty much the history is how we can connect with all the other countries through various policies, through improvement of investment policy, or to free trade agreement. How has this been achieved? Going back to what I've heard quite a lot in the previous session, I think the 4 pillars for Vietnam on how to achieve this have been fairly simple. The first one has been how to regulate the state-owned enterprise. There's no real possibility to open an investment, to open up to foreign investment or to free trade agreement without a regulation on state-owned enterprise, right? So the first point, which has been quite consistent of the example of China in this regard, has been how to create a fair economic ground, and to do so, to regulate and to break the monopoly of the state-owned enterprise. That's been number one. The second one is to promote industries. Vietnam was pretty much a completely agricultural country. I think agriculture was still employing 80% of the population in the back in the 90s. How do we promote various sectors of industries? Number three, how do we promote exports? So how do we promote exports? By integrating into regional agreements, by working with other countries to create free trade agreements. The most recent one being the RCEP, and fourth pillar, develop industrial parks all across the countries. So now in Vietnam, you'll see we pretty much went from almost 0 industrial park back then in the 90s to close to 400 total industrial parks now. All this has resulted basically in Vietnam being able to become a very export-based economy, and as you see in here, Vietnam is in Southeast Asia the country with the highest export to GDP ratio, which means that now the Vietnamese economy is pretty much an economy that's completely driven by its exports. Vietnam lives and dies with the exports, which is, I think, as Roshani mentioned in the introduction, quite spectacular as a development. As we all need to remember that in the 90s, the trade was almost close to zero, and Vietnam was one of the poorest countries in the world. Vietnam is still, I would say, at the very beginning of its economic development. Right? We may look at the aggregate trade balance of Vietnam, and basically we'll see that Vietnam has despite having very huge exports, has a very minimum trade surplus, which means that the added value in Vietnam is still minimum, which means that right now, the core of the investment case in Vietnam, most of my clients right now in Vietnam actually are in this position, are to use Vietnam as a low-cost, low-wage export base. I think just a few indicators for everyone in this room. Vietnam is still a much poorer country than Sri Lanka. I think the GDP per capita of Vietnam is still only 2,500 USD per annum, right? So Vietnam is still pretty much a low-cost export base right now, with basically US, Japanese, European investors building their export base in here and re-exporting their goods. Hence the fact that most of the trade surplus of Vietnam of Vietnam has been with the developed countries, right? And how has this export base being built? Most of the exports right now is still generated by the FDI enterprise. So the previous session insisted quite a lot on how to on the impact of the FDI. I think it's quite dramatic if we see in here for Vietnam. Most of the export activities is driven by FDI enterprise. We'll see a quite famous case example later on, but you see in here. Which means that Vietnam lives and dies with the exports, and the exports is very much reliant right now on the FDI, new FDI, and also all the existing foreign enterprise that have been building their business in the past 10 years. And I think a fair summary of what is Vietnam is in here. So in here, you'll see the situation of all the exports on one axis by destination and the other by sectors. So there's roughly two main sectors that drive most of the exports from Vietnam right now: consumer electronics, textile, garment, footwear as the second. And most of our exports right now is in these two sectors to developed countries, being US, China, EU, Japan. And so this has been the story right now of Vietnam, building an export base in consumer electronics, in footwear, in apparel to developed countries. So there has been two pillars, roughly, to be able to build that. The first one has been all the public policies, as I mentioned, towards the development of industrial park, industrial zones, which include also, of course, not just the industrial park, but also all the infrastructure, all the roads, all the transportation infrastructures, and all the supply chain to support the development of the industrial parks. I think as of now, we have almost 400 industrial parks. There's been very strong public policy to promote basically the implementation in each of the provinces of Vietnam. If any of you have considered Vietnam as a potential base to set up a manufacturing plant, we may see that you may have seen that in most of the provinces of Vietnam, in most of the 60 provinces of Vietnam, you have a quite dense network of industrial parks. And the second is the improvement of the ease of business. So Roshani mentioned the ranking of Sri Lanka. Vietnam is in that range, but one of the commitments of the Vietnamese government have been to build a more transparent and a more business-friendly ecosystem throughout the years, and by cleaning, for instance, all the tax issues that were an issue in Vietnam, also all the registering properties and all the properties rights for the foreigners. All this have been areas of improvement in the past 10 years to create a more business-friendly environment in Vietnam. I think if we combine the infrastructure policy and the building a more economic-friendly and foreign-friendly environment, this has been the two pillars to help promote exports and foreign investment. And to close, maybe to give anyone the sense of how this has been built up in Vietnam, the very famous case of Samsung. I think the largest enterprise right now in Vietnam, people may not know, is Samsung. Samsung is the #1 employers, #1 in terms of turnover, #1 in terms of export weight. Samsung has basically become throughout the years the #1 and the largest enterprise in Vietnam. If we pull out some numbers, so the total investment of Samsung since 2008, where they really started to invest in Vietnam for all their production capabilities, has been over $18 billion throughout the years. And a bit of numbers. Samsung alone, as now they manufacture all their phones in Vietnam, account for 23% of the total export value of Vietnam. Total revenues last year was 70 billion USD. That's just to put in some numbers, and they employ close to 200,000 workers now. Interestingly, I think Samsung started as a purely manufacturing hub in Vietnam, leveraging the low cost of labor and the low wages. As you can see, Samsung has been now investing in R&D centers in Vietnam. They have opened FSU, recruiting engineers, and now trying to involve as much as possible the Vietnam base in more higher added value activities. And the benefit of Samsung has also been to drive, this is a non-exhaustive list of their partners, a whole ecosystem of both supply chain, of both distributors, of both suppliers, local suppliers, right? So I'm very much often asked the benefit of Samsung to the Vietnam economy. Is it real? Well, I think the benefit of Samsung is that you can see all this enterprise have been in here have been created quite recently. All this are tier one suppliers or tier one distributors of Samsung right now, and are very much driven by all the investment and all the business activities that Samsung have been committed to doing in Vietnam. So in that sense, the presence of a very large FDI investing heavily throughout the year in Vietnam has been a strong driver of developing both in terms of macroeconomy in Vietnam and both in terms of microeconomy. All right, I think this was to share the snapshot on how Vietnam have been doing. So handing up to you, Roshani.
Thank you very much, Hien. Thank you for those comments and contribution towards the event. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, please post your questions on the chat box on your screen. We will take them up once we finish with all with all speakers at the end of the presentations and during our Q&A. So please go ahead and ask your questions on the chat box.